think I'm going to go ahead and get the meeting started. I think we have a good number of people here. So first of all, I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us tonight. This is the Legacy Park Master Plan Forum. Before we get started, I just wanted to introduce myself and the board members of the Winnona Park Neighborhood Association. My name is Tom DeSimone. I am the president of the Winnona Park Neighborhood Association. And with me tonight are our other board members, Pete Shanine, who is our vice president. Seeger Swanson is the treasurer of the WPNA. Jared Polly is our secretary. Julie Brody is communications director. And Amanda Schroeder is our social chair. Amanda is going to be playing a pretty special role tonight. She's basically my administrator, and we have the chat set up so that if you need to reach her, if you have a technical difficulty, or when we get to the Q&A section and you want to let her know you'd like to ask a question, if you hit the chat feature, it will go directly to her and she will be fielding your questions during the meeting. So that is the WPNA, and those are our members. I think we have a couple distinguished alumni with us tonight too. I think we have Cynthia Osborne, who was a longtime communications director for us. She's not with the board anymore, but she still devotes a tremendous amount of volunteer time to help us out. And I think we also have Robert Leach in the crowd. He was actually the first president of the Winnona Park Neighborhood Association. So I just wanted to point them out and thank them for their service to the organization. So before we get started, I would also like to introduce the commissioners who are going to be participating in the meeting tonight. First of all, we have Mayor Patti Garrett. In addition to being mayor, she was originally the District 2 commissioner. So she is a resident of the Winnona Park area. So some people had expressed concern that when we originally scheduled this meeting that there was not a District 2 representative. Patti does serve in that role in addition to being the mayor of Decatur. The other District 2 representative who is joining us today is Lesa Mayer. She was elected this past election cycle, and she is our District 2 representative. And the third commissioner who will be participating in the discussion tonight is Tony Powers. Tony Powers is the commissioner at large. So he represents both District 1 and 2. And he also serves in a role as mayor pro tempore. We also have a couple other commissioners who are here tonight, but will not be fielding questions. George Dusenberry, who is the District 1 commissioner, is in the audience. And Kelly Walsh, who is the other District 1 commissioner, is with us. And the final representative of the city commission, she's not a commissioner, but she is the city manager, and she is Andrea Arnold. She's here to kind of ensure that all open record requirements are being met with this meeting, because as Dan noted, there are 4 commissioners in attendance. So there are certain requirements that need to be met because this does qualify for coverage of the open records meeting or the open meetings legislation. So without further ado, I just wanted to kind of let everybody know how this meeting is going to flow. Now that we've introduced the board members, just a couple of ground rules in the way that this is going to work. So there have been a number of questions that were submitted in advance of the meeting tonight. Those questions were forwarded to the commissioners on Friday of last week. So they've had an opportunity to review them and to do whatever research is necessary to come up with, well-reasoned and thoughtful responses. So the way this is going to work is once we proceed to that portion of the meeting, I'm going to ask the question, and then I'll turn it over to the commissioners and they will provide a response. Once that portion of the meeting is over, after all of the pre-submitted questions have been addressed, we will then open it up to a live Q&A session where anyone in the audience can use the raise your hand feature, or if you have trouble figuring out where that feature is located, it's a little tricky. Again, just reach out to Amanda and she will put you in the queue and allow you to provide, to submit your question and call on you. Everybody here is muted right now. So as we call on you, we'll unmute your microphone. You can ask your question, the commissioner will answer it, and then we'll move on. So that's pretty much the basic setup of the meeting this evening. So, and then just one other kind of, call for civility that I'd like to put in place before we get to the live Q&A section. I I think our commission and our mayor, they spend an inordinate amount of time at these meetings. They are compensated, but it's nominal compensation. I think they all have day jobs. This is something that they do out of a sense of public duty. So they are, I believe, dedicated to making sure that Decatur remains the great place that we all call home and know and love. So I think when we're dealing with them, we should operate with that assumption that they're operating in the best interest and that they want what's best for this community. And I think we all have that perspective. We may have kind of differences at the fringes as to how we achieve those objectives, but I think in general, when you conduct yourself and when you ask questions during the Q&A section, I would just ask that you be polite. And I don't want to see people hurling accusations or insults. Because one thing to remember is that even though these are commissioners, they're people, they're your neighbors. You're as likely to run into them at the supermarket as you are to see them in Decatur or anything. They are your neighbors. They have children in the same schools as you. So just keep that in mind, that before you flame somebody or you hurl some type of accusation or you think you're going to say something mean, that these people are your neighbors in addition to being your commissioners. Conversely, our commissioners serve at the pleasure of their voters. It is public service, but they're ultimately accountable to the public. And that means if you don't agree with something that your commissioner is doing, they're always going to be accountable at the ballot box. So if you really believe that your commissioner is being accountable and they're pursuing what you would like to see them pursue, by all means, show up on election day. I think our next one's in 2021. And vote your commissioners back in. If you don't like what they're doing and you think we're on the wrong track, we live in a democracy. Show up and vote for a different commissioner. That is your right as an American. And one of the other things that I just wanted to bring up is what we're doing tonight is we're exercising our First Amendment constitutional right. It's right in the First Amendment that you have the right to petition your government for redress of grievances, which is the founding father fancy way of saying, if you see a problem, you have the right to go to your local government and ask for a solution, and they can't discriminate against you or do anything to punish you for doing that. That is your constitutional right, and that's a little bit of what we're going to be doing tonight. So let me get off my soapbox, and I will proceed to go through the questions that were pre-submitted. And so again, I will go through the question. I will, turn it over to the commissioners. They'll provide the response, and we'll just move along that way. Once we go through all these pre-submitted questions, then we'll turn it over to the floor and people can ask follow-up questions, or if you prepared questions in advance, we'll go through those. Again, the meeting is scheduled for 1 hour. I'd like to thank all the commissioners again for taking the time out to participate in this meeting. I think this is a very important part of what the WPNA does, is civic engagement and putting our members in touch with their elected officials. So this is all part of that. So I'm going to go and begin with the first question that was submitted to the Neighborhood Association. It's from Jonathan Straub. The question is, Dear Mayor Garrett and Commissioner Tony Powers, while some amount of affordable housing was certainly included in the Legacy Park Master Plan, it is clear that the green space and nature preserve aspect of the property was undoubtedly the most essential desire for the park as expressed by the community. Why is such a large focus and so many resources being allocated to affordable housing while the park itself is deteriorating in the meantime? There's an ungodly amount of trash and debris throughout the park. Invasive species of vines are choking out most, if not all, of the trees. The buildings are decrepit, and the lake, which is a huge resource of the property, is in serious peril. The water level has dropped drastically over the year, an extremely wet season posing a threat to all the flora and fauna of our great park. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Commissioners?
Mayor, you want to start and then I'll chime in? Or
yeah. First of all, I think it is important to look at the property is 77 acres, 22 acres are in a conservation easement, and The portion that is set aside for affordable housing is 8 acres. And so I think it is not an either or housing or green space, park space, or recreation space. I think it's more a both and it's a pretty modest amount of housing split into 2 areas. I did want to address some about the trash and debris and the ivy and the pond. We do hope to have some neighborhood cleanups. Obviously, COVID has impacted that. I spoke with Hugh Saxon just this afternoon to ask about the status of the ivy as well as the pond. And he did say that I believe that they are looking, they're taking a proposal for ivy removal to be reviewed, I believe, at the Environmental Sustainability Board to see what all that would include. And he said it would most likely be a plan that would go over several years, and it would probably involve some community volunteers that would be coordinated by an organization or a group. The city's done some ivy removal on some of the really, really large, this big around ivy that is growing up some of the trees, but it is going to be require a variety of techniques to address that. And as far as the pond is concerned, I think all of the commissioners did tour the area recently with members of the Environmental Sustainability Board, and the pond has, the beaver dam has broken. And so the pond has, the level maybe has gone back to what it originally was in that area before the beavers built the dam. So, but I do know the city has sent out or had an engineer take a look at it, and we'll be looking at options in terms of the pond and cost and that sort of thing. So, and I know the other commissioners may have something to add in terms of the question itself. So.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So one of the things, I also went on a tour with Michael Black and members of the ESB, and we spent, Commissioner Mayer and myself spent a significant amount of time, talking about the aesthetics of, the importance of the pond and all that it serves, and each bringing a different set of lenses to that equation. And one of the things I do outside of my role here in the city, I serve on the board of South Fork Conservancy, which is a 501c3 initiative to restore 32 miles of natural trail that exists in this great city of ours, and in addition to the city of Atlanta and going into Buckhead. But to make a long story short, I serve on that board with a number of people that have a particular expertise and would be happy to assist the city of Decatur as it comes to. One of them runs the Chattahoochee Nature Center. So there's expertise out there willing to lend a hand to the city, and we all realize this is important. A couple of other things, as we talk about, it's, again, the mayor pointed out, it's 77 acres and multiple buildings. We realize that through a management agreement with the Decatur Legacy Project, a lot of this task work will get done both through the city and the Decatur Legacy Project. So, while we've spent the last year trying to come up with a management agreement, we have spent time working on the buildings. If many of you have been over to the property, you will see a familiar face. Dorsey Noble's there all the time, constantly working on those buildings along with other city staff. So it's not that they're being neglected. There's just a lot of buildings that need a lot of care. I'm not sure if Commissioner Mayer has anything to.
I mean, there's not much I can add to that. I think that the direct nature of the question was about our focus as commissioners. And I would say that we are not actively working on any specific affordable housing projects in Legacy Park right now. And I think that's very important for the residents of Decatur to understand. That is a future state project. Current state is maintaining buildings, doing improvements to the green space and things like that that will have a more immediate impact. But the direct question about why there is such a significant focus on affordable housing, we're just simply having discussions with the community about concerns that they have right now. That is our focus right now, but there is no active project going on for affordable housing at Legacy Park right now.
All right. Thank you all. I'm going to move on to the next question, which was submitted by Alan Philip Clark. The question is, why can't we have less new construction of affordable housing units at Legacy Park and reuse some of the historic buildings that are already there as rehabilitated historic buildings / affordable housing in an effort to, number one, save resources, number two, save money, number three, preserve the history of the site, and number four, reduce land use, thereby preserving green space? Commissioners?
I'll start there. One of the things that, while we have the housing addendum, there is no development plan. So we haven't gotten into the bricks and mortar of sort of what affordable housing can look like. And many of you in this community probably live in a house that's been renovated. If you live through a renovation, you'll understand why it's really difficult to renovate an older space to make it something that is up to today's standards. While it is a doable proposition, in many cases, it's ultimately more expensive. So we haven't gotten to that point yet where we're going to have that big discussion about, maybe rehabilitating some of the buildings. If you've been through some of those buildings, I have, many of them are beyond what it would take to salvage. So we would pour more resources into the rehab than we would just do from starting fresh. So, again, this is very early. We do not have a development plan, as Lesa Mayer said. The last 2.5, 3 months have been spent times responding to community concerns. We have not actively, nor have we sought any, professional expertise beyond the housing addendum, which was passed earlier this year.
I do think, there is the plan does have preservation as a part of it. And I think particularly in the North Housing Village, there are some cottages, but as the Mayor Pro Tem said, before we invest resources in those buildings, we will have financial data that we will look at and consider as we move forward with any piece of the plan. And so what I see maybe happening in terms of affordable housing when any plan comes forward, it's probably going to include, we'll have to include some of both, some reuse of some of the buildings that are in a better shape. They may be older and dated, but they're worth reusing, as well as putting in new housing as well. I think it's going to, we're behind, so it's going to take efforts on for reusing as well as building some new.
Any other commissioners have anything to add, or should I just move on to the next question?
No, the next question, please, Tom.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Thanks for your responses. The next question was submitted anonymously, and the question is, the addendum to the master plan for the park seems to include multiplexes and quadruplexes on the corner of Katie Kerr. Please excuse my dog. Hold on. On the corner of Katie Kerr.
Excuse my kids. They're making more noise than your dogs.
On the corner of Katie Kerr, where there is currently a pristine pine forest with no invasives that should be preserved. How do you justify building on this green space when there seem to be other areas that could be utilized by converting or tearing down non?
Your dog's having a blast. Again, back to the previous question, it's a placeholder. Again, as the mayor said, this is 8 acres of 77, so a little over 10%. We're not talking about clear cutting. And the other part of that is, as we talked about locating this housing village, it seemed appropriate to locate it right adjacent to new construction that was just on the other side of Katy Kerr so that all the housing could be grouped together. So it seemed like the logical place to put it. Again, all of these are very preliminary. And of course, these sites are all placeholders. So, who knows what the future of that plan could look like. And again, anything that happens or any development still would go through a public process. And we would be held, whether we, the city as the developer, or we farm that out, would be held to the same building standards.
I think too, if you look at the plan, part of what impacts the area on the south end is there is an internal road that would be that was asked for by the community to make that connection from Katy Kerr connect to Kirk Road and get rid of that very awkward sort of intersection. But again, we would be looking at that as a part of, as well as traffic studies and those kinds of things would be a part of anything that's brought forward. And there's nothing that we have to consider. But I do think that the impact that I see is not so much from the housing, but from a road that the community, the Winnona Park community, actually asked to be a part of the project in order for that easier crossing. So again, that's something that we would be looking at as any kind of project came through.
Thank you, Mayor Garrett. Unless anybody has an additional information to add, I'm going to move on with the next question. I also took care of the dog problem, so hopefully you won't hear it for the rest of the meeting. The next question was submitted by Susan Taylor and Daphne Hall. And their question is, we are in favor of the Legacy Park Master Plan and appreciate the vision and the work of the Decatur City Commission on affordable housing. Yes, in our backyard. Decatur's essential workers, teachers, police officers, firefighters, healthcare workers, sanitation workers, grocery clerks, etc., deserve to be able to live in a green and lovely location convenient to their places of employment, and Decatur deserves and needs the diversity they will bring to our community. Question: if the goal is indeed to maximize the number of truly affordable units at Legacy Park within a mixed income housing development, what is your plan for doing that? In other words, how will the development of as many affordable housing units as possible be ensured and enforced, while at the same time reserving market price units for people of all income levels? Commissioners?
We'll give this one to Commissioner Mayer.
Oh.
Because I think we've been asked this at meetings as well. So
We have, and I have a very strong standpoint on this. When a partnership or a partner comes forward with a plan, we will then take the time to evaluate that plan to ensure that the number of units that are stipulated in the plan that are affordable, that the development, that the vision, that the traffic plan, that all of these things make sense for our community. So we would not, at this point, have any way of saying how many units would be affordable and how many would not. I can tell you personally that I would not support any plan that did not have a majority of affordable by definition units. And I think that it is really important for us to remember that while we are talking about this addendum, it is truly just a framework. And until a true project with documentation comes forward that we can analyze and present to the community for community feedback, we're really just talking about hypotheticals here.
I'll add to that. I also agree with Commissioner Mayer. As we look at this, we're really dealing in hypotheticals at this point, and I can only speak for myself, but I rest assured that the rest of the commissioners feel the same way. These are impacts that are going to last generations, and to not get the maximum amount of affordability in that component, it would not be worth pursuing. And we couldn't find the community partners willing to do so without, those numbers in place.
All right. Well, thank you, Commissioner Powers. I am going to move on to the next question, which was submitted by L. Vickery, and this is kind of a multi-part question. It says, can the city of Decatur commit to revisiting the master plan with public input? Second question, can City of Decatur consider tearing down a number of the duplexes in Legacy Park to maximize green space, recreational facilities, and housing? And the last question is, has the City of Decatur considered a land trust development that would allow ownership at an affordable rate to better bridge the income gap? Your response.
First of all, I want to respond to the first one. Even though we have a quorum here, we are not taking any votes. Any thing like this would require a vote in an open meeting of the entire commission. And I also want to share a comment that Dan Immergluck, who lives in the city and teaches at Georgia State University, provided in response to the survey that Legacy Voice has put out about the Legacy Park. And he states that there was well over a year's worth of careful and public planning on the Legacy Park site. There was as much public participation in that process as I've seen in a redevelopment project of that scale. And I've been teaching and practicing in urban planning for 30 years. I would encourage everyone to look at the DecaturNext.com site that outlines the steps that were taken with public input. And in terms of the second part, the duplexes, I think that are currently being occupied now as a part of relocation for the Decatur Housing Authority to do some renovations and remodeling. They're being used now, but I believe those are slated for demolition if and when we hope a project will come forward. And lastly, the City of Decatur has a land trust that was established. It's in place, and we think it would play a part in the housing that is put in at Legacy, as well as the Cottage Court development that is planned along Commerce Drive and is a part of our, we think it would be utilized as a part of our inclusionary housing ordinance. So, we do have that tool in place. And Valerie Wilson is the chair of the Decatur Land Trust. I don't recall everyone else that is on that, but we do have one already in place.
I think the mayor did a thorough job of, explaining the question and answering the question. I mean, I can't offer much more other than saying, some of the things, the foresight that's, working in parallel with the land trust. I know that a number of times I've heard in different meetings where it's been said that we would give that land away, and that's never been a thought of the city commission. That was floated about in meetings with consultants saying, if you did that, but that is one of the reasons we formed the land trust, because we don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. When the city developed property next to the old Scottish Rite, and when those terms were up, everyone immediately sold, and that those units that were built were no longer affordable. So we have no desire to repeat something that's happened in the past.
Well, I'll add to that, actually. First, I think that the first question that Ellie posed is probably going to keep coming up and keep coming up and keep coming up. And so I think that I don't know, but I would hope that maybe if the question is asked in a different way, maybe not asked of the entire city or the entire commission to answer, that we may be able to, address that. I think that you know, I am of the unpopular opinion of the city commission that I'm not a fan of keeping all of the buildings. And but that's me. And I think that I would be open to seeing what it would look like if a developer or a partnership did come with a proposal that did not necessarily utilize or preserve every building. And that's just me speaking for myself. And when it comes to land trust and affordable home ownership, I think that a lot of major cities have really found innovative ways to introduce affordable home ownership using land trusts and to keep those homes affordable for the next owner. And I would love for us to look into ways that we could incorporate something like that here in the city, because affordable renting is one thing, but affordable home ownership genuinely does bridge gaps. And really does help us even deepen our work toward equity. So I would like to see us as a city and as a commission look into opportunities for us to be able to look at implementing some affordable homeownership opportunities in the future.
All right, thank you very much, Commissioner Mayer. I'm going to move on to the next question, which was submitted by Seth Johnstone. And his question is, what is it about the brick buildings throughout the park that make them historic? I'm not referring to the stone buildings such as the chapel or the Atlantic Cottage. From a new development perspective, it seems it would be more cost effective to remove these to free up additional green space, basketball courts, or more recreational components, and then concentrate new housing in a single area built to modern specs. Thanks again. Your response.
Well, I think from one of our questions about why don't we preserve the buildings and not build new, there is disagreement about the reuse or build new. I do think that one of the reasons we have housing planned for 2 different areas to take advantage of some of the spaces that are available for putting in housing units. I think we have also stated that any monies put into the older buildings would come before the city commission, and we would look at the financial data and how those buildings were going to be used. It is a method of preservation is a method of recycling and saving resources, as was pointed out in an earlier question. And so, but we also have to look at what makes sense and the use of that. And so I think anything that comes with spending money, capital money on the buildings will come before the city commission for discussion. And so I think there will be the buildings that we have currently spent money on are the administrative building that is housing the children and youth services. It's housing offices for Decatur Education Foundation, for L'Arche Community, Global Growers, the book festival, and we've spent some money on the I believe on the gym that was being used for our active living department, and we have spent some money on another building that was being used for after school programs. And so those facilities are or were in use and had been planned for use for camps this summer. So I think as buildings as we look at putting money into various buildings, we'll be looking at the use, and we'll have, it's sort of like the affordable housing discussion. We will look at those and weigh the benefits and the possible downsides as well. So I do think that we'll have opportunities to look at expenditures and uses as those come to us.
Thank you very much, Mayor Garrett. I'm going to move on to the next question. This was submitted by Lucius Herman. The question is, regardless of the number of total housing units, what percentage will be affordable? That is 30% to 60% of area median income. And what percentage will be workforce, which is 60% to 120% of area median income? All of the housing units can be built as affordable and workforce if we choose to make that a priority. Is the city committed to using Habitat for Humanity or other nonprofit builders who have a proven record of building affordable housing? Your response.
You know, the one thing that we have the luxury of here in this city, we have the Decatur Housing Authority, who has a proven track record of building affordable units and maintaining a high level of those. As for the first half of that question, I think it's a bit early to determine whether or not these percentages will actually take place. Again, we are dealing with a hypothetical at this point. So number of units, size of the units. So we still don't know. I think this will get fleshed out, you know, over the conversation of as we approach this citywide. So when we get to that point, I think then we'll start to have, and we've got, you know, people in place. We had a affordable housing task force, and there were a number of recommendations from that task force that were deliverables to the city commission in terms of how to help us achieve our affordable housing. So I think it's very early on to commit to any numbers because we don't have any data to back that up. But again, we also have, you know, expertise currently in the city that currently does this for a living. And I'm sure that we will rely heavily on our community partners in the Decatur Housing Authority.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Powers. I'm going to move on to the next question, which was submitted by Sonali Sandane. That question is, the nonprofit board, which now manages Legacy Park, the Legacy Park site, pretty much looks like the former and current Decatur City Hall. What was the application process to appoint board members, and was it open and transparent so that anyone could have applied? Also, no one on the board has expertise in conservation, yet the number one priority for the land based on the initial planning process was preserving green space. The annexation of space for the currently developing Publix property and housing units have no earmarks for affordable housing. Yet this was planned during the same time as Legacy Park's master planning. Why would Commissioner Powers and Mayor Garrett not advocate for affordable housing in that project if they care so much about it? Your response.
So the process was an open application process, and that was on the Decatur Next site, and it was also on the city's website, and there was an open call for applications in the Decatur Focus. Like any other nonprofit board, I've served on a number of them, and you do what's called a gaps analysis. You look for people with a particular expertise. The Decatur Legacy Board was established long before the acquisition of Legacy Park, and it was only heightened by the purchase of Legacy Park. And it stands to reason that you would want to have community assets in place on a board that's managing a community asset. Again, there was an open call for applications, and we had a number of applications, and those folks, and there was calls taken to make sure that folks were appointed from both sides of the city, District 1 and District 2. We didn't want to have an imbalance. In fact, there were additional members appointed so that we would have more community representation than actual, or as much community representation as city officials and appointed city officials. I'm going to stop for a moment there and let Mayor Garrett speak, and maybe Commissioner Mayer, and then go back to the second half of that question.
I think we had a recent city commission meeting where we did talk about the role of the Legacy Project Board. It certainly does have as a part of its I guess governance structure the Legacy Park, but that umbrella also includes some smaller groups that really did not have a house in the city in terms of being able to have a place where, like the Oakhurst Dog Park is housed under that umbrella, and they have done some fundraising and have a small amount of money that they have. We were running Season of Giving through, it is a 501c3, so it is a non-profit. So you can make donations to Season of Giving to a non-profit for tax purposes. We ran the Decatur United program through Legacy Project, so that and raise money for our small businesses. So and we look to see that, I mean, there may be some other groups, Mayor Pro Tem, if you that are housed under that, including the Legacy. And it was initially established to help have an organization that would coordinate the bicentennial celebration of the city of Decatur in 2023. And so, that celebration will be under that. And by having a nonprofit, we're also eligible for grants, and that the city would not be eligible for, in terms of things that groups that we could partner with and get grants for, things that can happen through the various umbrella projects that are housed under Legacy. So it is not just Legacy Park, but it is obviously, that's a large, it is a big part of it, but we were looking for expertise and community members that would bring a broad range of experiences to a nonprofit board. And we did have an open process, and the folks that were selected submitted statements of interest, and we advertised that. I think we probably put it in the Focus. I think that's the way we normally put it out, through a number of different channels for people to apply. I'll briefly just talk a little bit about the public's property that the approval process was going through at the same time that the Legacy Park master planning was going on. The city of Decatur had for a number of years used kind of the carrot approach to get more developers to include some more affordable units, and it was called the voluntary life cycle density dwelling bonus. And so it allowed for developers to have increased density on a site if they would put in a certain percentage of units as affordable. They would get increased density. They can increase the number of units that were being built. That really led to limited successes, and so we also passed updated an ordinance to allow for accessory dwellings, to allow an additional way to get some, perhaps maybe some income, or to have a unit that could be rented out as an affordable unit. And at the same time, we began looking at other ways to try to figure out the best ways to increase our supply of more affordable housing, and the methods that we would need to use to do that. It is a metro-wide problem. I was on a webinar the other day that showed that area rents in the metro Atlanta area had gone up 26.5% in the last 5 years. And compared to the peer cities, we started at lower rents, but we have gone above and beyond some of those. And so there have been a lot of solutions that are being discussed in Decatur as well as in the metro area. we started with a housing summit that we did, I believe, in the fall of 2018. We selected members for the Affordable Housing Task Force, asked them to bring back recommendations, and rather than just kind of throw something on the wall to see what would stick, we really wanted some experts to give us some ideas about what would work for the city of Decatur. And from that, the maintenance of naturally occurring affordable housing is a big thing that we'll be looking at soon, because I think that has a lot of possibility for maintaining some of the affordable units that we have. And I think at the time of the study, there were about 900 identified. And then an inclusionary housing ordinance or an inclusionary zoning ordinance. The city of Atlanta was the first city, I believe, in the metro area to pass an inclusionary zoning ordinance. It was done, I believe, in December of 2017 or early 2018. It identified 2 locations, the Beltline and West Side. This year it took over 2 years to get anything built under their inclusionary zoning ordinance, and I believe there are 2 projects that have been approved. And Brookhaven had an inclusionary zoning ordinance for 10% affordability or affordable units, similar to what we passed. It was passed in early 2019. They have their first 2 projects moving forward. They've not yet been permitted or gone all the way through the process. So inclusionary housing is the way to do that. It is not a panacea, and we will see. We hope that will be a tool that we're successful with, but it wasn't because we hadn't been considering other ways and doing other things. It is just one of the tools that we hope, now that we have passed our inclusionary housing ordinance, we'll be able to, it's required, so anything that comes through has to be met, has to meet it. We'll just have to see what developments can come through that will meet that. So we had been doing some things. We were not in the position really to pass an inclusionary housing ordinance, because I don't think all of the necessary work had been done to figure out what that needed to look like. So that's a long answer to a short question. Sorry.
Yeah, and I'll back that up by saying, I think at the beginning of every discussion, when it involves a proposal before the city commission, what others in the community may not know, or many of these projects, they have a right to develop them, meaning the process has been ironed out in the Unified Development Ordinance. So many of these developers have a right to develop within that space. And I start every discussion by saying, can we have affordable housing here? It is not something that is just a pastime. It is something that each city commissioner holds near and dear. I know particularly in my space that I look at that, that's something I care deeply about, because I've been here long enough. I've seen the community change where it was, not quite 50-50, but it surely is not there now. So I know the importance of having affordable and attainable housing in our community. So it is something that I passionately look at. One of the first things I asked when I was elected 5 years ago was, why are we not doing impact fees? Well, we now have an impact fee advisory group. So it takes time in all these spaces to have the proper documentation and have the right amount of research with limited staff. So it is something that we continue to build on, so we can use all the tools in the tool belt to give us, more affordable housing and make Decatur a more equitable place.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Powers. I'm going to move on to the next question. It's another 2-parter. It was submitted anonymously, and the questions are, my questions are about the timing of this development. Our schools are currently overcrowded, particularly Winnona Park Elementary School, and projections show that this will continue for many years to come. In 2 years, Decatur High will not have enough desks for the upcoming surge of students. Will this project be bringing more students to the schools during this time of overcrowding, or will the city wait until there is capacity in the schools? And the second question was, the streets surrounding our neighborhood are overcrowded as well. And before the pandemic, speeding, running of stop signs, and aggressive driving was a regular rush hour occurrence. We currently lack sidewalks, speed humps, and other infrastructure to address these safety concerns. And we've been told by the city that there is not enough money to build them. Will city funds first be used to provide this basic safety infrastructure for our neighborhood before adding more cars to our streets? I ask that you please put the brakes on further development until these important issues are addressed. Before you all provide your response, I just want to note that we're about 5 minutes away from the 1 hour end time of this meeting. And I know that Mayor Garrett had said she would be willing to add an additional half hour. So I just wanted to confirm that's still the case and that we're okay to go to that extra half hour and, potentially maybe a little more than that if you want to fit in the live questions. Are there other commissioners and mayor okay with that?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
I may have to step away for a medicine break, but yes.
That's fine. Yeah, if in case everybody is not aware, Commissioner Powers had a pretty extensive dental surgery earlier today, so we really appreciate that he jumped out of the dentist chair and was able to join us tonight.
So, again, back to we're all dealing in a placeholder right now. There is no active plan for development. So I think the first part of that question is we're not going to have a development here in 2 years. So, but let's dial that out to a much bigger scape right now. We talk about development and, while a lot of the development that's happened here has been the result of years of planning and, the recession back in 2008 put the brakes on a lot of the development you see now. This would have occurred naturally over a space of those same 10 years. So the end result was once the bank started loaning money, there was all this development that had already been permitted and planned. We've addressed some of the sidewalk concerns. In fact, there is current permitting and planning for sidewalks through the Shadow Moore Street to connect areas of Winnona to the new Tally Upper Elementary School. So that infrastructure is really important. I know the city has also planned for wider sidewalk improvements along the strip from Tally down to the Legacy Park property. So we realize that we need to really make sure that pedestrians and bikers and everyone has safe access into that corridor, because this is a new activity for the corridor now. Yes, there's a ton of cars out there, and we've got to do our part to make sure that we can keep folks as safe as they can. In terms of further breaks, again, we don't have an active development plan here at the site. The addendum for the housing is just that, it's a placeholder. And I'll let Mayor Garrett and Commissioner Mayer also chime in, as I think I need that medicine break right now.
I don't think there's much more to add to what Mayor Pro Tem Powers just said. Again, it's a placeholder, and the city is, continually, annually working on sidewalk improvements and making those improvements to infrastructure annually. Maybe not as fast as some would like, but it is happening. And so, those activities will continue to move forward. There is no plan right now. There's no development plan for Legacy Park for affordable housing. I probably said that more times than I should, but I just want to make sure that everyone understands.
Sure. I don't have anything additional to add.
Right. Well, thank you, Commissioner Meyer. I'll move on to the next question then, which was submitted by Rick LeBrant and Andy Larner. Their question is, If affordable housing is a major priority, why hasn't the city of Decatur sought out an agreement with each and every high density housing project they have allowed to be built within the city limits in the last 10 years to set aside 10 to 15% of the units for that very reason? Most major cities do just that. Decatur could have done that with Omni Decatur, Trammell Crow, 1133 Commerce, Mill Creek, and the Bank of America property, Cortland Decatur, etc., but has not. Most of these high density apartment buildings are only built to be flipped once leased up to 75%, and profit only the developer and not the city. The Arlo and 1133 Commerce are two recent examples. My understanding is that the Methodist Church sold the property to the city of Decatur with the understanding that it would be a permanent green space. The church would have made a lot more money if it had sold it to a developer. Please explain how this is not a breach of the contract to now put 175 apartment units on that precious land. Your response.
I think, I responded some to the reason, that we were using a density bonus rather than a requirement, and each project that came through was offered that bonus, and our planning folks did. We had, I think the Artisan originally had a density bonus. I believe the Arlo had a density bonus. I know we had another unit that had a density bonus, but we did not get the sort of response that we had hoped to get. The Cortland actually does have 90 senior apartments that are affordable as a part of the Cortland development. And so I don't have much to add from my previous comments about having that affordable housing inclusionary zoning component until it was just recently passed. I did want to just briefly state with respect to the Methodist Children's Home and the agreement with the Methodist Children's Home, that is really not a correct assumption that the Methodist Children's Home was selling it to the city of Decatur so that it would not be developed. The Methodist Children's Home was selling the property in order to get a fair price for it, so they could focus on the change in their objective of serving in the community, which had switched from being a children's home to supporting foster families and young adults aging out of the foster care system. I actually did see a potential development plan that was presented to the Methodist Children's Home, that did include a very large number of every acre of the park would have been developed except for that is in the that was in the floodplain in a conservation area. And I had a conversation after the master plan was developed. I had a conversation with the director of the Methodist Children's Home, and he expressed support for the efforts of the city to combine green space, active play, recreation space, preservation, and affordable housing. Children lived and grew up on that property, and so having people there was something that was a part of the history of that property, and there was never any discussion on the part of the Methodist Children's Home Board or its director that they did not want to see. The only stipulation we had was they at first wanted the chapel, and then they no longer wanted to have the chapel. It now belongs to the city, but they actually were thrilled to find out that the plan included so many different aspects, but especially a plan that would include families and children.
And let me add to that, the back half of that question said that these developments only benefited the developer and not the city. A little bit of a sort of a background, the city of Decatur is about 4.3 square miles. And from the time I joined the Planning Commission back in 2008, 2009, our commercial tax revenue was somewhere around 14 or 15%. If you ask a number of city planners and folks that are planning new cities to ask what the ideal ratio between commercial tax revenue and residential tax revenue, you'll hear somewhere between 60-40 or 65-35. So the city of Decatur would not pass the thresholds needed to be a viable city. And I say all of that to say that each of those developments, they don't get a homestead exemption. They pay 100% of their tax rate. And what that means is in 2020, our commercial revenue was up to 20%. It was 17% in 2019. So the needle is moving, albeit very slowly. It is moving in the right direction. And so that's been one of the tenets in City Hall from the time that I can remember being active politically in this city, and also being active as a volunteer, that we needed to move that needle. So we continue to try to move that needle, and each of those developments have their own merit in and of themselves. So I know, again, a long answer for a fairly complex question.
Yeah, these are not easy questions to answer. So sometimes it takes a while to give a full response. The next question is our last pre-submitted question. So we're going to move on to the live portion of this meeting. After that, where people will be able to ask questions of the commissioners. So the final question that was submitted in advance was from Bob Leach, and his question is the following. I have a great deal of confidence in our city commission. I have no reason to believe that they did anything but vote to amend the Legacy Park plan to increase the number of housing units entirely because, one, they thought it was in the best interest of the city, two, they thought the citizens of the city wanted this change, and three, believe the transparent process leading to this recommendation and vote had been followed and participated in by many Decatorites. I also don't doubt the city commissioners were surprised by the size and enthusiasm of those who disagree. So despite the process and hard work by many that brought us to this point, and regardless of the merit of the two opposing views, isn't that enough concern by enough people to make reopening the issue not only reasonable, but a responsible choice, especially for a city that takes pride in having extensive citizen participation? Your response.
Mr. Leach is referring primarily to the housing addendum. And I think that it's hard for me to, what do we say to those people who have participated in that planning process and who are extremely supportive of using Legacy Park for an opportunity to have some ability for the city to provide a way to allow some people who might not otherwise ever be able to live in the city of Decatur, at least not now or in the near future, to say we're gonna open that back up so that we would look to scale it back. I think that it really is a pretty modest number compared to, I mean, it's split into two areas. 175 units are not going all in one place. I also feel like we're having plans now with a stormwater master plan. We're doing strategic planning now. And so we passed the stormwater master plan, and do we, in a couple of years, or the people who are not particularly happy with the outcome of the stormwater master plan, do we then go back to that after, putting that in our ordinances? I don't know if any of you participated in or followed the East Lake MARTA Transit Oriented Development Plan. There were people who were not happy with that particular plan. There were people in Oakhurst who did not, they support affordable housing, but just not to the extent that would have been, that could be at the East Lake MARTA station. Transit-oriented development requires 20%. There is a part of the plan would allow for increasing that to closer to 30+%, but it did require adding an additional story to the building that would be built as a part of that. And to me, it just feels like, what do we do with our planning efforts if we tell the people that participated in good faith and support this housing addendum, and that is also supported by our affordable housing task force, and it is supported, I think, by the Decatur community to try to do something to address the inequity and the lack of affordability in the city of Decatur. And so I think for us to say we're just going to ignore the housing addendum and start the process all over again, I think to do that, as I mentioned before, it would take the will of the city commission to say we're not going to use the housing addendum, and there's no plan. There's nothing really for us to consider at this point. There will be ample community input once we have something to consider. It's a framework where it is, to quote Commissioner Mayer, it is something that there are many steps that have to take place before anything can be built out there. But I do feel like that the framework is solid. There are a lot of moving parts that we will have to consider. And I think that we'll have ample opportunity for people to have input when we have something more tangible to look at. So that's all for me.
I don't have anything to add to it. That's a pretty good explanation for me as well. And part of that is, suddenly do we go back and open up every plan where it might not have gone the way a particular group of folks would have liked it to go. Again, we're never going to make a decision where everyone is 100% in agreement. And so we have to adjust, and we have to negotiate, and we have to come to some common ground in order to achieve. Otherwise, we'll spend, paralysis by analysis, and we get nothing done. So Commissioner Mayer, I'm not sure if you have anything to add to that or not.
Well, I've said very publicly many times that I think that plans need to be reviewed at certain periods of time to make sure that they are still the right fit and right sized for our community as our community changes. So no one should be surprised to hear me say that. But I think that what may surprise people, or maybe even shock people, is that even in the event that a plan get reanalyzed, the feedback that is provided by one specific group would just be one factor for consideration as to what the final plan would be. And I think there has been, or at least what has been communicated to me in emails and conversations from residents, is that there is an expectation that a small group of residents should be able to make the decisions almost in a vacuum that would allow that would basically allow us to format the planning or formulate whatever planning would take place. And I think that would be wildly irresponsible of us as public representatives to do that. I think that what we really want to focus on here is how we can look at plans that we have created and just ensure that we are making smart decisions based on our planning process for our community when those decisions are being made, and that we need to be comfortable enough to say, while we had a topic in the plan, 7 years after the plan was created, perhaps that topic in the plan doesn't quite fit for our community anymore. And we need to be okay with making those decisions, because really smart growth and implementing, smart plans, I think, is more important than implementing a plan for plan's sake.
Thank you, Commissioner Mayer. We appreciate your response. And with that response, we're going to move on to the live Q&A section of the meeting tonight. And the way that this is going to work is you can directly text Amanda with your question, or say that you want to ask one. She's going to randomly select people, and she will call out your name and unmute your mic. At that point, you can ask your question, and your mic will be shut off. The commissioner will answer, and we'll proceed to the next question. And again, I just want to remind everybody, please ask your question in a respectful and polite manner. If you decide that you're going to insult people or, cast allegations or make ridiculous statements, we're going to be very quick on your microphone. We will cut your mic and we'll move on to the next questioner. So just bear that in mind. This is a Q&A thing. It's not a debate. So ask your question and we're going to move on. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda. Amanda, just select the first questioner and you can unmute their mic and let them ask their question.
Okay, great. I think the first question goes to Janet Saul. She had a few questions early on that she wanted to have answered.
Hi, am I unmuted?
Hi, Janet.
Great. Hi there. Thank you. Thank you to the commissioners and all the community members. I think it's great for us to have this kind of rigorous participation. I think it's awesome. So I have two questions. One is, I have heard the message loud and clear that the housing addendum is a framework. And so my question is, as something more specific does come in, I think, as I've heard you all say it, or does get developed, how can we be involved as the specific plans are put together before they're finalized? And in the, like things like what Ellie Vickery brought up about, what about ownership instead of rental? Or I know in the housing addendum, I have concerns about the 0.6 parking spaces. And I think that's wildly unrealistic. So I guess the question is, how can we be involved in the specificity as this gets developed down the line? That's the first question. The second question is, I feel like some of the conversations that I've heard on other commission meetings and just out and about in the community and on social media are people talking about, Legacy Park and it being, affordable housing versus green space and recreational space. And I have to admit, I have not read the housing addendum in full detail, but I think there's room to do some of all of it. And I would like, to know if there is a way to move forward with trying to ensure that we try to meet some of all of those needs. So those are two of my questions. Thank you.
Very quickly before the commissioners respond, just in the interest of time and in fairness to everybody, and I don't mean to pick on you at all, Becky, if we could just limit your question to a, one question per participant, I think it would be helpful.
Let me start with a second question. I'll be brief. It's never, for the commission, it's never been a this versus that. It is something that there's space for all of this. I've said from very early on, for this to work, it has to mean a little to a lot, not a lot to a little. So I think that all those things can exist in harmony at Legacy Park. We just have to be willing as a community to put in the time to do that work and be in that space, because it's not a, we can have this or we can have that. We can have it all. We just have to be willing to put into work to make sure that we can get it done.
The question that has been posed, I think, is, do you want green space and a park and recreation, or do you want 175 housing units? And that is really an invalid question, because there is, as I said at the very beginning, 8 acres out of 77 are what are on the housing addendum for development for affordable housing. That's what's in the framework. And in terms of being involved, I think that we will, I hope you all have gotten the postcard survey that the city has sent out, and this is what it looks like. It should be coming to your mailbox. How you would like to be informed about public participation and in community engagement, and let us know. Do you want to get text messages? Do you want to have call-in surveys? Do you want how do you want us to let you know about what's happening in the city, and what kind of meetings do you prefer? So please fill those out and get those back to the city. So our strategic plan that we're currently working on, as well as any pieces move forward on this, the information that we will communicate to our residents will be done through a multitude of ways, through social media, through our meetings are always on the website. I think you can sign up, I believe, to get notification about the city commission meetings. Commissioner Mayer posts the city commission meeting on her, she has a city Facebook page. So we want you to know when things are happening, and I think we will be, as things move forward. I think those questions about how much can be ownership, how much you get more bang for your buck in terms of you get more units with rental. Do we make some of them rental, some of them home ownership? But I think we will be soliciting community input as anything moves forward, and we'll see. It is not, I don't think it can be on the very, very front end, because we have to have something to look at to discuss and figure out what might be, what some of the choices are. But I think we certainly heard input from you all and from those who participated as to the size and the scale and the type of building. So we will make sure that we try to get the information out to you as quickly as possible. But it will have to have some meat and bones for us to look at it and then talk about it and see if that needs refining in some way or changing in some way. If that makes sense.
Thank you very much, Mayor Garrett. Amanda, do you know who the next person in the queue is?
It's Todd Poole.
Wonderful. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. First, thank you so much, commissioners, for participating in this. I know that this is a tremendous sacrifice of your time, and we really do appreciate all the time that you've put into listening to all of these comments. Mayor Garrett quoted somebody who talked about the large amount of public input that went into planning the Legacy Park, with the hundreds, if not thousands, of hours that were put into the dinner meetings and community sessions. And when they were done, 91% wanted the smaller housing and more active space. But then without much notice and with almost no community input, except for housing-oriented groups, there was the voted on. Now, I understand from this meeting that is a framework, but you went from a framework of approximately 80 units to 175, which is 33% larger than the largest affordable housing community in this at the Trinity Park. and then delegated responsibility for development to this legacy committee that is outside the city commission, how are we as community agents and process-oriented community agents supposed to have input into how this is developed when it's been delegated to a committee that is not elected, and then we have this vast community input that is not heeded. So how can we trust that this is going to be a community oriented consideration?
Let me thank you. Great questions, and thank you for your participation. I know we don't always see eye to eye on every issue, but the one thing I will tell you is that the Decatur Legacy Project does not have the final say-so. The Decatur Legacy Project will bring interested parties to the City Commission, who will be the ultimate decision maker through a public hearing process. So we have not taken the public out of the decision making in terms of the ability to have input. That was never a consideration, and that is never something that I would agree to do so willingly. So that is not something that whatever the Decatur Legacy Project does bring to the table in terms of development opportunities, the City Commission will always have the voting say on what happens. And I'll, let Mayor Garrett chime in on a couple of other things, but I wanted to reassure you that we have not taken your voice or our community's voice out of the equation.
Right, there would not be a decision to select a community partner that would not come before the City Commission, and the potential plan would be voted on by the City Commission. So the Legacy Project Board does not have the authority to do that. They can make recommendations. So I think in terms of the number 80, I think that was not a number that was presented to the City Commission. I think I know that it was on a electronic version of the plan that I'm not sure anyone even knew was out there until we were contacted earlier, I guess this summer or spring, about that particular number. And I don't know if it was a typographical error. Commissioner Mayer and I spoke about that number, and the written materials that the City Commission reviewed as when we adopted the plan did not have a number, because the consultants felt like it was preliminary. We had to have a pro forma that was done that looked at a number of factors that would impact the number of units. The lower level, when you get more and more affordability at the 30 to 60% level, or even the 60 to 80% level, those numbers vary according to density. I mean, that's just what makes the numbers work. So those are the kinds of things that the city will be looking at when we do have something to move forward. And the other piece I think that's overlooked sometime is, I believe there's 40 something units that are a part of the North housing village. And so I believe what we see in the addendum is somewhere between 100 and 130, maybe 132 on the south side. So it is not all clustered in one space. So I think that and I've seen the 91%. That was never meant to really be like a popularity contest, or to, because I think some people that voted for some of the different concepts liked pieces of each concept. And so I think that was a little bit, I think sometimes, I don't know if people, I was at the meeting when that was explained as to how you were to participate, and then to say, I like this particular concept, but I'd like to also have a track, or I'd like this particular concept, but I'd also like to have, and so the information that was provided back to the consultants included those comments, and not just the concept 1, concept 2, or concept 3. So that's I think all I can add to that question.
All right. Thank you very much, Mayor Garrett. It looks like we are at 8 o'clock. I was wondering, would you be okay with answering one more question, and then we will wrap up the meeting? Are the commissioners okay with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, Amanda, could you let us know who's next in the queue? I think you're still on mute.
Sorry. I had Cynthia, I think, but then I also had Steve. So I don't know. I think Cyn lowered her hand. So I'm gonna go with Steve here. He's had his hand.
Okay, this is Steve, and if Cynthia's ready to go, I'll defer to her.
Hi, Steve.
Okay, well, hearing that, yeah, I want to add my thanks to Mayor Garrett, Mayor Pro Tem Powers, Commissioner Mayer, for what I found to be a very informative session, and really have more of a comment than a question. And I think I appreciate the notion of looking forward and how do we make the process as open and transparent going forward. And it might be that, as you described, there are lots of steps that are going to happen before anything actually takes place. And so maybe sort of laying out, what those steps are and the points where people would have an opportunity to provide input. And obviously, yeah, the community doesn't get to design the project, right? The developer gets to design the project, but if there's a point where then the community can provide some input. So just so people know when there'll be these opportunities and they don't feel blindsided. I think that's the problem I've seen in a number of these cases, is that things that go through a process and then all of a sudden people feel blindsided because they hadn't heard about it until it seems like everything is final. The other comment I'll make about the affordable issue, and I was peripherally aware of the issue with the project in Oakhurst, where that didn't work out quite so well. And my understanding was the Bank of America decided to abandon their plan with the density incentive. And so maybe again, and maybe this is in the affordable housing report and I should go look for that, but providing folks, this is what's been tried in the past to try to increase the amount of affordable housing indicator. And this is why we think a different approach is going to be more productive, both at Legacy Park and at some of these other developments. So just providing a little bit of that information packaged together a little bit. But thanks again for your time.
It is
I'll
in the
answer.
Housing Task Force report. So, and we also have on the Decatur City website, I think it's in the Community and Economic Development website, that you can go to and look at the steps that the city has taken in a little brief explanation. But the Affordable Housing Task Force kind of goes into that and quite in depth, as well as the analysis of next steps we need to take in order to start catching up more. So I can answer that part. And I guess to your first part, I think we've heard pretty loud and clear that we need to make sure that we did have a large number of people participate. I think that we're doing a communications audit now. You can also participate in our communications audit that is available. I think I know it's been on Twitter and Instagram, and if you sign up for city text messages, there was a text message sent out today that you can participate in the city's communications audit. I think it's also linked on the website. So that's a great way. There are, what, 50 of us or so here. Tell us how you want to be communicated with, and then we can hopefully do a better job at making sure that you are aware of when we have a public meeting that we're going to be discussing a potential project and how to give input on that. Is that helpful? Thanks.
All I think Mayor Garrett, I just wanted to say, I think Cynthia has her technical difficulties ironed out. So if you don't mind, I think she had, this will definitely be the final question of the night if we can get her on the line.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Cynthia.
Great, hi. Yes, I would like to, I guess, start off certainly by thanking you for everybody taking the time to do this. It is definitely helpful. I have two questions and I'll try and keep them brief. But the first one goes to, which I'm going to assume that you've probably seen or been made aware of, the process information that I put out as it relates to the master plan versus the addendum, the amount of public input for the master plan, overwhelmingly, the amount of time and everything versus the addendum. So given that there is a disparity, there is a huge disparity, and you've said, all the commissioners have said here tonight that we're not going to go back and, open things up. But there is a question of, certainly there are times that it does need to be opened up again, when voices haven't been heard, when the community has been left out of the process. Under what circumstances, if any, this is my first question, would or could the process be opened again? Number two has to do with the management of the Legacy Park project, I guess. It's my understanding that one of the reasons given to the city commissioners during the December meeting when they voted to turn over management of Legacy Park to that nonprofit was because the city wouldn't have time to do their normal jobs as well as handle the management of that. However, now there are 4 city representatives, employees on that board, on that 11-member board. So, and when that vote was being taken to turn it over, the management over to that nonprofit, Mayor Garrett and Mayor Pro Tem Powers abstained, leaving the remaining 3 commissioners to vote. And then after that vote, even one of those remaining commissioners, who's no longer serving, ended up also being on the board of that nonprofit. So the question, and I apologize for it coming so lengthy, but do you at least acknowledge the appearance of conflicts of interest with that? And can you help me understand how, when one of the reasons given to the city commission was the city doesn't have time to management, and yet almost half of the board is made up of city members?
Hi there. So let me clarify. And I've been a part of this discussion the entire time. I think that what's missing from this conversation is each time an action needed to be taken at Legacy Park, whether it was something simple like a roof repair or a pipe burst, the city commission would have to be called in. If we didn't have a regular scheduled meeting, the city commission would have to be called into a special session to deal with ongoing maintenance. And if you've ever been part of something where things happen on a spur, that simply isn't realistic, a realistic expectation of the city's time. It's not like I am the chair of the watershed department, like so many other cities that have smaller government. So it was, part of that statement is true, but part of it really goes to the expedience in which something needed to happen that was a maintenance issue, that you would have to call a quorum of city commissioners together on short notice. So with that being said, I will let the mayor possibly address the other parts of this question and then come back if I need to fill in those gaps otherwise. But it was more about expedience and dealing with day-to-day operation with a appointed board as opposed to trying to quorum an elected body. if that makes sense.
I think what we got with the legacy board is kind of a blend of community members, and Mr. Poole talked about wanting to make sure that the city had adequate oversight in terms of what was happening there. And so we do, part of the role of the legacy project is going to be to hire a part-time executive director to oversee some of those things that the mayor pro tem, we've been contracting for those services, but those are the kinds of things that the city recognized that there needed to be someone who could fill that position. And by having that person be employed by the legacy board, it offered an opportunity for, and I mentioned this at the beginning, that you can do some things as a nonprofit that the city can't do in terms of some grant funding and some other opportunities that are available through a nonprofit that would not be able, the city could not do. But for any expenditures, major capital expenditures, not when a pipe burst, and not negotiating the terms for the nonprofits that are there, those would, we have approved those as a part of the city commission, but now we have somebody that can work out those details with those nonprofits. Or it's been a space that film companies have wanted to rent and have rented and used, and there's that opportunity. So it's having a board that can oversee some of those kinds of activities and through the executive director. And so it really is kind of a blend of the city staff as well as city commissioners and community members. And we spoke earlier about the application process for submitting statements of interest to serve, and the people who are serving on that bring a lot of different expertise from either nonprofit board service or financial expertise or other. Meredith Strube is the chair of our public finance authority, that is actually the body that we use to purchase to be able to get the funding for Legacy Park. We had to use a PFA. And so, you know, I don't see that it seems to me more like a partnership rather than a conflict of interest. And again, with respect to the process of the master plan versus the addendum and we did have a number of open public meetings that were announced and spread out with respect to looking at the housing addendum. And I think we have stated throughout this meeting that what we're looking at is a framework, and that any plans that come forward for housing would come before the city commission, and that there would be many opportunities for public input as those would come forward. And with the pandemic, and with we don't really know when anything might come forward, so it's difficult to speculate on what anything might look like, certainly in the near term. But it's a framework, as master plans are, and as pieces begin to be filled out, and certainly as public resources are spent in that, then those pieces will be brought forward to public meetings.
Well, I don't think that goes to the question of what would it take for the city to recognize that something needed to be quote unquote reopened or discussed. I understand that you don't want to go at it.
may I let me just jump right in. I'm known for my candor. So when
sure.
this was, I wasn't on the commission last year, anytime before that. So I came into this with fresh eyes, and I had to do a lot of research to understand what had happened prior to this point and what meetings occurred, what documentation was provided, how people were engaged, how people were notified of things. And as a new commissioner, I took that very seriously, because despite the fact that there was a difference in the number of meetings for the broad master plan versus the housing addendum, what I really wanted to see was whether or not there were no public meetings where people were able to provide input, and whether or not there was some sort of breach of rule or law that occurred. If there was, I absolutely was going to move in a meeting to reopen the plan. Now, whether that would have been voted up or down, I don't know, but that would have been the catalyst to do that. I looked through every document. I had conversations with people. I had conversations with participants. I had conversations with people who wanted the plan reopened, and there was nothing in the information that was provided to me that showed that there was any type of breach of rule or law or any type of wrongdoing. Would it have been preferable for people to be able to participate in more public meetings about the housing addendum? Perhaps, sure. I don't think that there is any obligation for those previous commissioners or for the city to have had such a robust process for their planning, other than their commitment to community engagement. So just to answer your question plainly, I would have certainly brought up the reopening of the plan if I felt that there had been wrongdoing by the previous commission. There was not. I don't think there's ever going to be a situation about this master plan that is going to make everybody comfortable. And so it would be unfair to reopen the plan based on the fact that one particular group with certain issues or another particular group with certain issues wants to reopen the plan, because there is not a plan that we could ever create that would be anything beyond a compromise. And I think, honestly, if we had to do it all over again, the goal would be to find a compromise again.
All right. Thank you very much, Commissioner Mayer. And with that, I'm going to call to adjourn the meeting. But before I do that, I wanted to thank Mayor Garrett, the commissioners, and City Manager Arnold for joining us tonight. Again, this is a completely voluntary opportunity, and we appreciate you all for taking the time to participate and give your very thoughtful and detailed responses to the questions that our membership asked of you. I also want to let everybody know that this meeting was recorded, and we will be pushing it out to our social media platforms. So if there was something you want to go back to, you're going to be able to do that. And I think last of all, I just wanted to let everybody know that even if you didn't get a chance to ask your question tonight, our commissioners have public email addresses and phone numbers. So if you want to continue this conversation with your district representative, you are free to do that. This wasn't the only chance to do some Q&A. They are available. They do have ways that you can reach them if you see them on the street, email, phone. So this wasn't your only chance to talk with them. I highly recommend reaching out to them if you have further questions or need clarification of anything that was discussed. So again, thank you all to the commissioners and our mayor and our city manager. And I also want to thank everybody that tuned in tonight and participated in this meeting. I thought it went really well. I myself found it to be very informative. So with that, I am going to call to adjourn the meeting and wish you all a very good night. And thank you all for participating.
Thank you,
Thank
Tom.
you.
Appreciate your
Thank you.
moderating and appreciate the questions and certainly the tone and respectful conversation that we were able to have with everyone. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And if you haven't done so, please remember to get out and vote.
Early and often, right?
Early and often.
Agnes Scott is open. So,
Good night.
Have a good
Thank
evening,
you.
everybody.
thank you. Thank you.